Good evening. Wherever you are, and however you feel right now, let this be your moment to slow down, breathe deeply, and drift into a world far away from the noise. Tonight's story is called The Lantern by the Sea. Once, on the edge of a quiet coastal village, stood a small stone cottage. It faced the ocean with quiet pride, as if it had been placed there just to watch the waves rise and fall like the chest of a sleeping giant. The villagers called it the Lantern House, not because it held a lighthouse or even a lantern in its window, but because its single window glowed softly every night, just as darkness began to fall. No one quite remembered when the light first started appearing. Some said it had always been there. Others claimed it was the work of a lonely soul waiting for someone lost at sea. But the truth, like most truths worth telling, was quiet and simple, and only known by the person who lived inside. Her name was Anneliese. Anneliese was not particularly young, nor was she old. She wore time gently, like a shawl around her shoulders. Her hair was silver at the temples, and her eyes had the faded clarity of someone who had seen both sorrow and beauty, and held space for both. Each evening, just after sunset, she would light a single lantern in the front window. It wasn't a particularly fancy lantern, just an old brass one, the glass a little fogged with age. She would sit beside it with a book in hand, or a notebook filled with sketches and half-finished letters. Sometimes she played soft music on an old record player, letting it float through the window and out toward the sea. People began to notice. Fishermen returning from the water said the light gave them comfort, a small sign that home was close. Walkers along the cliff said the glow felt like a quiet welcome. Over time, the lantern house became a kind of symbol, of stillness, of care, of presence. One evening, as autumn folded itself gently over the village, a knock came at Anneliese's door. It was rare. Most people admired the lantern house from a distance, respecting its quietness. Standing there, uncertain and wind-tousled, was a man in his 40s, with a travel-worn coat and eyes that carried their own weather. "I saw the light," he said, almost apologetically. "I've been walking for a while. I didn't know where I was going. But I saw your window, Anne." He trailed off, unsure what to ask. Anneliese smiled softly. "You're welcome to come in," she said. Inside, the cottage smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The fire was lit, and there was tea already steeping. She poured 2 cups without asking, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crackling fire and the sound of the sea through the window. "I've been, between things," he said eventually. "Between jobs. Between cities. Between lives, maybe." She nodded, understanding more than she let on. "I used to think home was a place," he added. "Now I'm not so sure." Anneliese smiled again, gently. "Home," she said, "is often just where you remember who you are." They talked for hours, and not always with words. Sometimes silence held more than speech ever could. When the man left the next morning, he turned to her and said, "Thank you. For the light." She nodded. "It's always there. Just look for it." And so he did. And others did too. Over the years, more people came. Not in crowds, never in droves. Just one soul at a time, drawn by the quiet light in the window. They came with stories unspoken, questions unanswered, and hearts that needed somewhere soft to land, if only for a night. Anneliese never asked much of them. A cup of tea, a kind word, a shared silence. She listened more than she spoke, and gave freely of what little she had, time, presence, warmth. Sometimes she would hand a traveler a small notebook before they left. Inside was a single page with just a few words. "Wherever you go, carry light. Not for others to see you, but for you to see your way." Years passed. The village changed, as all villages do. New families moved in. Children grew older. The sea kept rolling in and pulling back, in its endless breath. And still, the lantern house glowed. One morning, the villagers noticed something different. The window was dark. It wasn't like Anneliese to forget. Concerned, a neighbor walked up the hill and knocked on the door. When there was no answer, she let herself in. Inside, everything was peaceful. The tea kettle was clean and dry. A book lay open on the armrest. And there, by the window, sat Anneliese. Still. Quiet. At peace. In her lap was a notebook. The villagers held a small ceremony. Not grand or formal, Anneliese wouldn't have wanted that. But they came, one by one, with lanterns in their hands. Each person who had once stopped at her cottage lit theirs from her old brass lamp, now placed carefully by the window. And then something beautiful happened. The villagers began placing lanterns in their own windows. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind the sea, tiny lights bloomed across the town. A quiet constellation of presence. Of welcome. Of home. To this day, if you walk through that village by the sea, you'll see them. Dozens of warm glows in windows, each one lit in memory, in gratitude, and in hope. Some for the past. Some for the future. All for the present moment. And maybe, if you're walking between things, between cities or choices or chapters, you'll see a light in the distance. Maybe you'll knock. Maybe you'll stay. Or maybe just knowing it's there will be enough. Because sometimes, all we need to carry on, is a single lantern by the sea. Thank you for joining tonight's story. May your night be peaceful, your dreams gentle, and your heart a little lighter. Good night.